The ground beneath our feet feels solid, permanent, unchanging. It is the foundation of cities, civilizations, and belief itself. Yet deep below the surface, the earth is never still. Invisible forces grind and collide, storing energy over centuries, sometimes millennia. When that energy is released, the planet reminds us, without warning, who truly holds the power. Across history, earthquakes have shattered cities, reshaped landscapes, and altered the course of human civilization. They arrive in seconds, but their impact lasts for generations. Long before science gave us fault lines and seismic charts, humanity turned to stories, to gods, monsters, and myths, to explain why the earth could suddenly betray us. This is a story of fear and faith, destruction and resilience. Of how humans have tried to understand a world that moves beneath them. Because when the ground shakes, it is more than a natural event. It is a moment when the earth speaks, and humanity is forced to listen. Mythical beliefs of earthquakes. How ancient cultures explained a shaking world. Poseidon, earthshaker of ancient Greece. To the ancient Greeks, the sea was never calm for long, and neither was the earth. They believed both were ruled by one god, Poseidon. Known not only as the god of oceans, but as the earthshaker, Poseidon embodied instability itself. When the ground trembled, it was said that he had struck the earth with his trident, either in anger, warning, or divine assertion of power. In Greek thought, earthquakes were not random disasters. They were messages. A city shaken by tremors was believed to have offended the gods, through broken oaths, arrogance, or neglect of sacred duties. The collapsing of temples and walls was seen as judgment, not coincidence. Coastal cities feared Poseidon most. His domain lay beneath both land and sea, and earthquakes were often followed by tsunamis, reinforcing the belief that a single god controlled both forces. When harbors flooded or cliffs collapsed into the water, the explanation felt obvious to ancient minds. To appease Poseidon, sacrifices were offered. Horses, sacred to him, were drowned in ritual ceremonies. Temples were built in his honor along fault-prone coastlines, not to defy him, but to seek mercy. Yet Poseidon was not purely destructive. Earthquakes, in myth, also symbolized renewal, the violent reshaping of the world to restore balance. Just as storms cleared stagnant seas, tremors were believed to cleanse moral decay. Today, we understand earthquakes as the movement of tectonic plates, driven by forces deep within the planet. But for the ancient Greeks, Poseidon gave earthquakes meaning, turning terror into narrative, chaos into intention. In the shaking ground, they did not hear randomness. They heard a god reminding humanity that even stone cities stand only at the pleasure of the earth, and the sea that surrounds it. Namazu, the earthshaker. In Japan, the earth has never been thought of as silent or still. Beneath the islands, deep below soil and stone, something ancient was believed to stir. Its name was Namazu. In Japanese mythology, Namazu is a colossal catfish living under the land. When calm, the world above remains stable, but when it thrashes its tail or shifts its massive body, the ground trembles, and earthquakes follow. For centuries, people believed Namazu was restrained by a powerful god, pinned in place by a sacred stone. When that divine control weakened, even briefly, disaster struck. Earthquakes were not accidents, but moments when cosmic order slipped. This belief shaped how people understood catastrophe. Earthquakes were not expressions of anger alone, but reminders of imbalance between humanity, nature, and the spiritual world. After devastating quakes, artists created Namazu woodblock prints depicting the giant catfish being punished, restrained, or mocked. Some images portrayed Namazu as a destroyer, others showed it distributing wealth, redistributing fortunes after destruction leveled society. In this way, Namazu became more than a monster. It was a symbol of renewal. The myth offered comfort in chaos. If earthquakes came from a living being, then they could be understood, negotiated with, even appeased. Rituals and prayers sought not to defeat Namazu, but to calm it. Today, Japan stands at the forefront of earthquake science and engineering. Fault lines have replaced folklore, and seismic waves explain what myths once did. Yet the image of Namazu endures. It survives in art, in language, and in cultural memory, an echo of a time when the earth was alive beneath human feet, and every tremor carried meaning. Because even in the age of science, when the ground shakes, the feeling is ancient, and the instinct to search for meaning remains unchanged. Wrath of Atlas. To the ancient world, the sky itself had weight. They believed it was held aloft by a single being, Atlas. Condemned by the gods after a war that shaped the cosmos, Atlas was forced to stand at the edge of the world, bearing the heavens on his shoulders for eternity. His punishment was not merely physical, it was cosmic. The balance of the universe depended on his strength. When the earth trembled, ancient storytellers did not imagine random movement beneath their feet. They imagined Atlas shifting, adjusting his grip under an unbearable burden. Earthquakes, in this myth, were not acts of rage or judgment. They were signs of strain, a reminder that the world rested on something living, something fallible. Each tremor reflected the Titan's exhaustion, the momentary instability of a universe held together by endurance alone. In some traditions, Atlas stood upon the earth itself. When he staggered, mountains cracked. When he shifted his stance, cities shook. The ground was not breaking, it was responding. This belief carried a quiet warning. If Atlas ever failed, the sky would fall, and existence itself would collapse. Earthquakes were interpreted as preludes, subtle reminders of how close chaos always was. Unlike other earthquake myths, Atlas was not feared as a destroyer. He was pitied. His suffering explained instability not as punishment, but as consequence, what happens when too much weight is placed upon one foundation. Today, we understand earthquakes as the movement of tectonic plates, driven by forces deep within the planet. But the image of Atlas endures, carved into stone and memory. Because even now, when the ground shakes, it feels as though something ancient has shifted, as if the world itself is straining to hold together under its own weight. Jörmungandr, the world serpent. In the frozen imagination of the Norse world, the earth was never at rest. It floated in a vast, dangerous cosmos, surrounded by oceans, giants, and gods. And beneath it all lay a creature of unimaginable scale, Jörmungandr. According to Norse mythology, Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, was cast into the sea by Odin himself. There, it grew so enormous that it encircled the entire world, its body forming a living boundary between humanity and chaos. Its tail lay clenched in its jaws, holding the world together through sheer tension. But the serpent did not sleep. When Jörmungandr shifted beneath the oceans, the earth trembled. When it tightened its coils, the ground cracked. Earthquakes were not accidents, they were warnings. To the Norse, tremors signaled imbalance in the cosmic order. The serpent's movement meant that the fragile harmony between gods, giants, and humans was beginning to strain. Jörmungandr was not merely a beast, it was fate given form. Its eventual release was foretold to mark Ragnarök, the end of the world. When the serpent finally uncoiled, the seas would rise, the land would shake apart, and the gods themselves would fall. Earthquakes, then, were glimpses of that future. Moments when the world serpent stirred, reminding humanity that destruction was not sudden, it was inevitable. This belief shaped a worldview built on endurance rather than control. The Norse did not expect the world to last forever. They believed strength lay in facing the inevitable with courage. Today, science explains earthquakes as the movement of tectonic plates, driven by immense forces beneath the crust. Yet the image of Jörmungandr remains hauntingly apt, a planet bound by pressure, energy, and motion, always on the verge of release. Because when the ground shakes, it still feels as though something vast has shifted beneath us, as if an ancient serpent has turned in its sleep, and the world has remembered how fragile it truly is. Pachamama, spirit of the earth. High in the Andes, where mountains rise like living giants and the ground itself feels ancient, the earth was never seen as an object. It was a being. The Inca and many Andean cultures knew the world as Pachamama, Mother Earth, giver of life, protector of harvests, and keeper of balance. To these civilizations, earthquakes were not random acts of destruction. They were expressions. When the ground shook, it was believed Pachamama was shifting, breathing, or responding to imbalance. Tremors were interpreted as moments when the natural order had been disrupted by greed, disrespect, or broken harmony between humans and the land. Unlike myths that framed earthquakes as punishment, Pachamama's movements were seen as communication. A reminder, the earth was alive, and it demanded reciprocity. Offerings of food, coca leaves, chicha, and prayers were buried in the soil to nourish Pachamama. These rituals were not acts of fear, but of gratitude, acknowledging that survival depended on maintaining balance with the land beneath their feet. Earthquakes, then, were calls for reflection, warnings that humanity had taken too much, forgotten its place, or neglected its responsibilities. Even today, in parts of South America, Pachamama is still honored. Before building homes, planting crops, or beginning journeys, people offer thanks to the earth, recognizing that stability is never guaranteed. Modern science explains earthquakes as the movement of tectonic plates along fault lines. But the Pachamama myth captures something science cannot measure, the emotional truth of living on a restless planet. Because when the ground shakes, it does not feel mechanical, it feels personal, and in the Andes, the tremor is still understood as the voice of a mother, not angry, but reminding her children to live in balance with the world that sustains them. The world elephants. Bearer of the earth. In ancient India, the earth was not imagined as a drifting sphere in space. It was believed to be carried. Supporting the weight of the world were colossal beings, vast beyond comprehension, known today as the world elephant. According to Hindu cosmology, the earth rested upon the backs of gigantic elephants, who themselves stood atop a cosmic turtle floating in a boundless ocean. These elephants were not chaotic forces. They were pillars of order, living supports holding the world in balance. But even the strongest beings must shift. When an elephant adjusted its stance, when its immense weight subtly moved, the land above trembled. Mountains shook, cities felt the ground ripple beneath their feet. Earthquakes were not signs of destruction, but of cosmic motion. In this belief system, earthquakes were neither punishment nor prophecy. They were maintenance. The universe was alive, dynamic, and constantly adjusting itself. Tremors were reminders that stability was never static, it was sustained through balance and effort. This myth reflected a worldview deeply rooted in harmony. The earth was supported, not owned. Humanity lived atop forces far greater than itself, dependent on unseen beings maintaining cosmic equilibrium. Unlike apocalyptic myths, the world elephant did not signal an ending. It symbolized endurance. The shaking ground was reassurance that the world was still being held, that the elephants still stood, still carried their burden. Today, science explains earthquakes through tectonic plates, pressure, and release. But the ancient image remains powerful, a living world, supported by unseen strength, moving just enough to remind us that nothing stands alone. Because when the earth shakes, it does not feel broken. It feels alive. And in the ancient imagination, that life had form, vast, patient, and powerful enough to carry the world on its back. For as long as the ground has shaken beneath human feet, we have searched for meaning in the movement. Before science revealed tectonic plates and fault lines, mythology offered something equally important: understanding. Gods, beasts, and cosmic forces gave earthquakes a face, a motive, and a place within the human story. These myths were not ignorance. They were early attempts to make sense of a dangerous world, ways to cope with fear, loss, and uncertainty when answers were beyond reach. Today, we know the physics behind earthquakes. We can measure them, map them, and even predict their likelihood. Yet the awe remains unchanged. When the earth moves, it reminds us that civilization is built on something ancient and restless. That despite our technology, we still live at the mercy of forces far older than humanity itself. Mythology and science are not opposites, they are chapters of the same story. One explains why we feared the shaking ground. The other explains how it happens. And somewhere between them lies a timeless truth. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. As long as the planet continues to move, humanity will continue to listen, seeking meaning, seeking understanding, and learning, once again, how small we are in a moving world.